Take a look at the standard American grocery store. Most traditional architects hate this. They see an endless sea of asphalt, a distant, boring brick box, and write it off as ugly, chaotic sprawl. But if you drop the aesthetic judgment, you find something else entirely. This commercial strip is actually a highly evolved, ruthlessly efficient system of communication. To see why, you have to look backward. For centuries, classical architecture relied on carefully enclosing spaces. That worked perfectly when cities were experienced on foot, by people moving at roughly 3 miles per hour. The invention of the highway and the automobile broke that model. When you are strapped into a car traveling at 60 miles per hour, subtle spatial details blur into the background. They become completely invisible. To survive, buildings along the highway had to adapt. The speed of modern travel forced architecture to abandon spatial enclosure and adopt the aggressive tactics of high-speed visual persuasion. The physical reality of the car demanded massive parking lots, which physically forced commercial buildings to sit hundreds of feet back from the highway. This creates a severe design problem. The actual store is now too far away, and you are moving past it too fast in your peripheral vision for it to attract you using traditional spatial design. To bridge that massive gap, the architecture has to reach out and explicitly grab your attention. A new core rule governs this landscape. In vast spaces and at high speeds, symbol must dominate space. Recognizing this shift in priorities explains the specific logic of the modern roadside. This is Giambattista Noli's famous 18th century map of Rome. It maps the dense urban fabric, showing a clear figure-ground boundary. Notice how public life was defined by tight, carved-out piazzas treated as seamless extensions of the street. Compare that to this map of the Las Vegas Strip. The scale is massive, dictated entirely by the car. Instead of dense blocks, buildings sit isolated within giant, empty voids. Those voids are the sprawling, directional grids of the parking lots. In a strange way, they serve the exact same function as the sweeping, ceremonial gardens of historical palaces like Versailles. Because modern buildings sit isolated as tiny islands within these vast asphalt gardens, they require completely different tactics to communicate across the void to drivers. There are 2 specific ways commercial architects solve this problem of high-speed communication. The first is to make the literal shape of the building the symbol itself. Architects call this category the duck, named after this Long Island store. The building's sculptural form is the commercial message, explaining exactly what you're buying. The second, and far more common solution used across the Las Vegas Strip and down your local highway, is called the decorated shed. This diagram of the Stardust Casino illustrates a decorated shed, a generic, functional box tucked behind a massive, towering sign. Down here, the functional details are tiny. The giant heraldic sign overpowers it, because the sign is the actual architecture. Whether a building takes a literal shape like a duck or relies on towering neon trolleums, both approaches successfully solve the modern problem of communicating at 60 miles per hour. The orthodox modern architectural establishment absolutely hated these commercial tactics. They rejected them in favor of purist, heroic forms. Modernist architects became obsessed with pure spatial relationships. They intentionally stripped away overt symbols, banned neon signs, and avoided any historical allusions. But that approach carries a massive blind spot. Pure spatial design fails to guide or attract people when they are navigating a vast, high-speed commercial environment. By refusing to lower themselves to explicit communication, the architectural establishment ended up building spaces that were disconnected from how people actually drive, shop, and live. So the next time you drive down a commercial strip, try to stop viewing it as a tacky junkyard. The gas stations, strip malls, and casinos we pass every day aren't random clutter. They are highly specialized tools for a world in motion. This roadside vernacular represents a highly successful, perfectly adapted architecture of persuasion designed specifically for our modern reality. The lesson of Las Vegas is that by withholding judgment, we can finally see the sophisticated solutions that already exist in the environments we usually ignore.